When we invite someone else into our lives and we're hoping to expand our lives and nothing is happening in the way of communication to do that, I think that more often than not, that's where the question posed comes from. How do we communicate with people who don't wish to communicate? So in that context, I will say back to you, are you communicating with yourself in a way that allows you to know what you wish to experience in your relationships?
Hello, I am Kristen Bomas, and welcome to Struck by Enlightenment, where we are on a conscious journey to life mastery.
Today we're going to talk about communicating with people you don't feel know how to communicate. I love this question. I love it because inherent in it is the very judgment we need to address, which is a person's opinion or judgment that the other person can't communicate. So I teach a very different style of communicating, very different. And the style of communicating that I teach opens up relationships. So in a partnership, that becomes particularly wonderful because it opens the relationship ad infinitum. You can keep opening and keep opening and keep opening. There is no closing. But that's not the way everybody communicates. We learn to communicate by what we were told and by listening to the expectations from the people who told us what to do and trying to meet those expectations. So consequently, we learn to assume their expectations so that we can assume we are meeting them. So we start to assume who they are in the same way they assumed they knew who we were. A big mess. So, how do we communicate with someone who doesn't know how to communicate? Really, I think what we're asking is, how do we communicate with someone who doesn't respond in a way that shows they understand what we're saying, and maybe even, furthermore, doesn't share their own self, their own thoughts, their own needs in a way that opens the relationship? Well, everything in life starts with you and ends with you. Life is a circle, and you are the beginning. And of course, we know there is no end to a circle, but you are the start and end point. It just keeps going through you, from you and through you. And communication is a circle, and it is also a circle that begins and ends with you. So the other person becomes not so important in the circle of communication. And yet, they're critically important. Let me explain. If I know that I am uncomfortable with a behavior in a relationship with somebody, let's say they don't ever respond to my texts and rarely answer my phone calls, and I get very, very, very frustrated with that. And the very first thing I'm going to do is communicate with myself. Okay, what is this about with me? I'm really bothered by the absence of participation in the communication I'm attempting to open up. So the first question that needs to be asked is how I feel. Then I'm going to express that truth to the other person. And I'm going to say something like, I text you quite often and call you quite often, and I know your style is not to respond, but I want you to know that I'm very uncomfortable when I don't get a response to anything I attempt to communicate. Now, I'm teaching that other person where I'm at. I may also say to them, I'm wondering if you would prefer I not text or call unless it's really important. But sometimes I am texting or calling because it's really important and I'm still not getting an answer. So I may need to ask that other person, how does this work for you? What is it about for you, right? So I may need to ask them so that my needs are met. But any way you look at it, you're trying to satisfy your need in a relationship with another. And that's really what communication is. It's the need to be known and understood. It's an idea, a thought that you want to share, that you want to connect with, right? And again, you need to be understood in the course of that communication. So when nothing is happening on the other side, or it's counter to what you were hoping was going to happen on the other side, then it's time to ask yourself what that's like for you so you can then express that. Oftentimes, another person will not communicate in the way you do, right? Because everybody's a little bit different. So they have to learn what you need in order to feel comfortable. But you want to know, hopefully, what they need to feel comfortable as well. Why do they not communicate in the way you thought they would? Is there a shyness? Is there a hesitation? Is there a confusion? Is there an anxiety? What's going on in the other person? What causes it not to work? So before we judge it, we want to use the very type of communication I talk about, which is teach about yourself and explore that other person. Because once you just simply ask the person with compassion what stops them from responding or what stops them from sharing how they feel or what they would like to do, then they start they immediately go inward, right? If you're asking about them, immediately the question takes them inside themselves. And something is going to happen there. We don't know what, but something is going to happen. Oftentimes, that lack of communication comment comes in relationships where one person will say, "What would you like for dinner?" And the other person, "Oh, whatever you want. I don't know. Where would you like to go tonight?" "I don't know. What would you like to do for a vacation?" "Oh, I don't know. What would you like to do?" Right? And the one person who's asking the question is always having to give the answers, and it becomes very frustrating. Or they say, "I don't know." So the person who asked where you'd like to go to dinner or on vacation or wherever starts to name some places, and the other person says, "No, not that. No, not that." And it's a one-way street. And again, the person asking the questions and attempting to open communication gets utterly frustrated. Well, what's frustrating about that is there is no other in the interaction. So if I ask the question and I come up with the answer, I don't get to learn about you. So I pick a steakhouse or an Italian restaurant or a Mexican restaurant or whatever, and you say, okay. The person asking the questions is pretty much living within their own world. They don't have another individual expanding their world. And that's really why we're in relationships, to expand our world. I can live alone and go to the restaurant I want to go to the movie I want to go on vacation where I want to go, do everything I want to do. I invite another human being into my life and in relationship with me to expand my life, to learn about that other person, to know what they're about, to know what their dreams are, what they enjoy, what they'd like to experience today, tomorrow, and the next day. If I didn't want to experience them, why would I invite them into my life? When we invite someone else into our lives and we're hoping to expand our lives and nothing is happening in the way of communication to do that, I think that more often than not, that's where the question posed comes from. How do we communicate with people who don't wish to communicate? So in that context, I will say back to you, are you communicating with yourself in a way that allows you to know what you wish to experience in your relationships? Because when you get to a point in your relationship where the other person is not communicating, is it a relationship for you? And have you communicated to that other person in such a way that you're opening the doors to greater communication in the relationship? Or are you sitting back and saying, "You're not answering my questions, you're not doing what I want to do"? I could be asking questions to that other person and they don't know how to answer them. Or I'm missing the mark because it's too pointed a question. Am I asking questions to learn about me? Because maybe they don't want to answer those questions. Or am I asking compassionate, open-ended questions to learn about the other person? What stops them from communicating? Do they not know how? Are they insecure? Again, it is a time to ask. As I said earlier in the podcast, it's time to ask the other person what stops them. And if you find that the answer makes the relationship one that cannot fit in your definition of a relationship, then redefine it. But everyone is going to communicate in the only way they know how, the only way that they've learned. They are either willing to unlearn it and learn a new way to communicate or not. And that's not our call. That's the individual who is either communicating or not communicating. So again, as you can hear in the podcast, there is a cross between the way we judge that other person as not communicating, what we have done to open up the communication with that individual and understand who they are and why they are, quote, not communicating, end quote, and what we're doing to know within ourselves if this experience matches what we wish to experience in this type of relationship, whatever type it is. And if it isn't, to redefine it. So ask yourself first how you felt. Second, ask the other person what's going on in them. And finally, given all the information you gather, is this the type of relationship that is giving you the experience that you wish to have? Thank you so much for joining me. And until next time, may the magic be yours.
Thank you so much for joining me, and please visit KristenBomas.com, where you can easily access all of my social circles.